Myron, it's really good to see you. And I
And the
appreciate
same,
you.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to
It's the
you.
last day of January, so that would officially bring a close the first month of 2024.
Again, this is Baba Myron Jackson. You've been involved since your childhood in arts, in civics, in government, in your position as the director of cultural preservation for the territory, and later is your position as senator and president of the Virgin Islands Senate, along with your other interest positions as a graduate of fine arts, and as a designer, as a painter, as an illustrator, and as a curator of African history and culture. And
You do your homework, man.
your many travels have taken you to Africa and other places in the world to study and also to represent the Virgin Islands in official capacity as well as a capacity as a student of the world. So that is why I wanted to have this conversation with you.
Okay, very well. You are very thorough. Thank you very much. You did your homework, and yes, I'm all of that.
Mm-hmm. So being that you do have, because every time I come home and visit or we talk, you always, you drop in the gems of Virgin Islands culture and Virgin Islands history. And this short call, we're not going to be able to tackle all the things because I know we could talk for hours on any one particular subject.
Yes.
But being that this is the goal is to, and since this is your profession, to preserve the Virgin Islands culture, I'm going to open up and let you come with a statement as far as why you believe that such a project, or any other people, because there are other people who are in the community doing such things, who are trying to document, highlight our culture, and to defend it amongst all the things that are happening right now. Why do you think that is important for us?
Well, Baba Giles, thank you for the opportunity. I know we've talked about this for some time now. And congratulations on the launch of your blog, and also to commend you for your work that you have been doing in the territory, in the region, Puerto Rico, outside of the region in the US, as well as some of your earlier travels. Why I've come to the conclusion that once you have come to the understanding and the comfortability of your mission and purpose on the earth, you accept the task at hand and you do what you have to do, and what you can do, you leave to the ancestors and to the Creator, God, Olodumare. And I say that from a spiritual sense, in that I recognize that I can easily use the term as a gatekeeper, and as like minds and like visions and purpose, we've been connected because I met you in Puerto Rico in a restaurant. Some friends that led to a question, where are you from? Or you asking us where we were from, and we told you the Virgin Islands, and the rest is history. So that in itself was no coincidence. I don't believe it was a coincidence, but an act of faith. So in that regards, those of us that have the task of keeping, holding the gates, and making sure that we are able to keep the gate up, close it when it have to be closed, open it when it have to be open, admit and dismiss what is required, and I'm using that as an allegory, that the responsibility of the ancestors' assignment of passing on traditions, and not all traditions should be passed on, but if they are value and they provide continuity that is beneficial, yes. So my motto and my mantra is go back and fetch it, Sankofa.
Yes.
Which came from my visit to Africa in 1982 after the death of my father, and the discoveries and the spiritual journey that took place, and picking up a magazine that was entitled Sankofa and learning the Akan meaning of the word Sankofa, go back and fetch it, take the best of the past, bring it to the present so that it may be beneficial to you and the society to which you live, undeterred. So from that, over 42 years ago, I decided that on my return home, that my trip to Africa was successful, and that likewise I had a responsibility of bridging past and present and making connectivities and making connections and reknitting or mending the net or the tapestry of our history, because 250 years, which is now 350 years between American and Danish rule, plus several hundred, so if we use a 500-year chapter, much of that history has been lost to memory or is dormant in memory. So I grew up in St. Thomas at a time where our spiritual belief was still basically intact, which it still is, because until the last one of us dies, it no longer, it may cease to exist. That could be how we relate and our relationship to nature. When we see a lizard within the radius of our space, that lizard could mean different things. If a bird flies into a house or to your residence, we know what that means. We know the interpretations, or we try our best to remember the interpretations of dreams. If you dream teeth, if you dream of a wedding, if you dream of getting married, all of this wisdom, all of this spiritual belief system is tied to other systems that was brought to this side of the Atlantic, that was maintained, the memory to which ethnic group and what region in Africa was lost, but the practice exists as a creolization expression of who we are as a people, dash with European and Amerindian heritages. So with that said, I have been on a personal journey and a mission as a Virgin Islander within my respective roles in government, which span over 40 years. Started in 1983 in government and retired in 2021 out of government service. I was born at a time where in the 1950s where there were still people who were born in the 1800s still alive. My grandmother was born in 1905, respectively, my grandfather, 1904, my other grandfather, 1899, his wife, before 1899. So I had grandparents who were born on the 19th century and in the 20th century. Parents and grandparents, where outdoor toilets and was still existing, still people using coal pots for cooking as a main source of preparing meals, Jumbi stories, and the sighting of spirits, which we call Jumbis in the West African word for spirits. It's for us Jumbi, so we have Moko Jumbi, masquerading tradition, we is making mark of spirit. Still exists today in our festival as the word exists. Americans may say ghost or spirit, where you lived among relatives and residents who told you what they saw and what they experienced. And you may have cast a doubt and say, nonsense, stupidness, superstition. But I never was in, that was never a mode of my understanding. Because I had a grandfather who could see and an aunt who could see. And they shared their personal experiences. So the spiritual world was much alive for me, just as they took us to the cemetery every November 2nd, or when we had to inter a family member, and they told us who our ancestors were in that burial ground, who had name and who, if you were to really go back to your recollection, were just as alive as your living ancestors, meaning that their personalities, their contributions, their struggles in life became part of your DNA and your story.
Let me jump in there because you're bringing up something that's really important. I think that since we're on this idea of spirituality in the Virgin Islands, you know, for many of us who were born in the Virgin Islands, we were either baptized in some kind of Christian church. You know, in my case, it was a Lutheran church. I think, I don't know if were you Moravian or?
No, my father was a Moravian and my mother is Anglican and my grandfather's family is Lutheran. So those are the three denominations I'm linked to.
Okay, so to me, this is one thing, you know, being that we do our studies and we are students of the African spiritual traditions. You know, is that reconciliation or the lack of reconciliation between having this African ancestry, having these beliefs, these cultural beliefs that kind of, in a way, they clash with what our European colonized religions were teaching us. And me as a, you know, as a practitioner, as a student of Ifa and Orisha, coming from a Caribbean place where, you know, like you said, what people call superstitions, actually, there's actually reasons they're based in liturgy or in the spiritual technology of certain groups of people. We just didn't get the lesson sometimes, but we got the belief and we got the message to watch out for these certain things and not other things. But with that line, when, like you said, the word, superstition or nonsense, when somebody sees something, oh, you with that nonsense or with this, and that's not what we're doing. That's something I think that for me as a culture, being Afro-Caribbean people, part of our identity is so linked with our West African ancestors. I mean, we are just a continuation. We just got taken from one place and brought to another. So could you address that before we continue? Because to me, this is a very important part of what I think needs to be addressed as far as a Caribbean identity and going forward. What are your thoughts on that? Or what are your views on that?
I think that's a very good question, and I think it's a relative observation and question to be responded to. I began from that perspective because of the inherent conflicts that we still, as colonized people in the Western Hemisphere, in the Virgin Islands of the United States, in the Caribbean, and I wanted to specifically stress that because that is to which I live, and much of my life has been spent in this region. So this narrative is most likely another Caribbean person's narrative in this region. This is not indicative just to Virgin Islands, because there's a common thread throughout. And every afternoon, usually there's a ritual in this household since I've been retired. TV goes on to look at 3 programs: The Talk, The Price is Right, and Judge Judy, and then the national news. So that's a ritual between my mother and I, while those who work in the family are out. That those are the 3 programs I pay attention to for various reasons. And I mentioned The Talk because yesterday there was a discussion about child rearing, and the brother from Africa who's one of the hosts, and there's an African-American female and 3 other white American, 2 females and 1 white male, American male. It's interesting the dynamics between the 5 of them, 2 males, 3 females, because when they talk about certain things from their perspective, I usually can relate to the brother from Africa or to the African-American talk host. And yesterday was a discussion of the brother going into a supermarket with his daughters and a child going off, a white child going off on his mother. And he decided, oh no, this ain't happening like this today. Left the line, went up to the child and tell him, no way you are going to talk to your mother in that nature who gave birth to you. Bam, and then the child freezes and the mother takes a gas that this stranger perfectly comes to her aid with a child who is so disrespectful at such a young age. Now, I'm listening to this and relating because I know he have Nigerian West African parents. Then the African sister started laughing and saying, well, that's Black Mama's 1-800, meaning that she could relate too, because that's a direct call for Black Mama intervention, because it is no way that Black mama will stand up in that line and leave a child that came from her lands disrespect her in such a manner, because she would have done take care of that with either a look, a pinch, and you wouldn't dare. So in that short discourse was a definitely indifference. Not that white parents in America don't have similar values in child rearing, because we could find that there are similar threads. But the stories are enough to know that there is the indifference of how Black people raise their children versus white parents, how they raise their children, and there are exceptions in between for both.
Definitely, that makes me think of a story. My mom, told me, because St. Thomas is a small island, and as I say, you go out in the street and you represent your family, and you're gonna start acting out of the way, somebody's gonna check you. And I don't know what it was that my mom, she was in town someplace, and we after school, and she did something out of the way, as we would say in St. Thomas. And before she even got home from school, her mother was already waiting for her, because they were already gotten back to Muddy over in Smith Bay, that your daughter was acting out of the way in town. And this is a time when, it wasn't that there was buses or cars running all over the place. A lot of people didn't have modes of transportation. And my mother said, I really don't know how, before I got home, that news hit my mother's ear. And it's just so that we have that kind of that old school raised in a compound kind of way. You're a part of a community. And I think that, a lot of elders say that we've lost that, because they said now they're afraid to see somebody in the street acting any kind of way. They're afraid to correct any young people now, because they don't know if they're going to just go off on them, or cuss them out, or tell them, stay out of the business. Because I believe that that is something that, for good or for bad, that we are kind of definitely losing in the Virgin Islands culture, where if you're an adult, an elder, and you saw a child doing something they weren't supposed to be doing, going against the values and the morals of the society, you could be corrected by any one of these people. Now that doesn't seem to be the case as much.
Yes, and that is where the Western values and American values have tainted the mores and the traditions of child rearing. Now, I am not here sitting having this discussion to say that we're the best parents. That we're the best at parenting, but obviously it worked to a large degree, which it did throughout the world, because child rearing and what was expected of a child in other cultures likewise is similar. You dare not disrespect an elder. You dare not disrespect your parents, and parents will tell you they'll take your life out. They'll take you out. They bring you in the world, they'll take you out. And they were as serious could be. So whatever was in their reach may fly your way. And fly your way could be a pot, could be a broom, could be a stone, wherever. So you duck in or you get hit. And you get hit, yeah, they tell you they love you. If you need stitches, you get stitches, and you come home, and but you learn your lesson. So you'll think 3, maybe 5 or 6 times before you open your mouth, suck your teeth, cut your eye, mumble, grumble, slam door, kick off shoes, whatever that bad attitude. And similarly to this discussion of child rearing, and I know we're a little off of the question, but it's all connected, because discipline is an essential aspect of how successful you will be, how you pay attention, how you know to stay in your lane and when to leave out of that lane, how to pay attention around you. So last night we had a birthday dinner for an extended family member who made 85, and her grandchildren, which is the age of 3 and either 6 or 5, were at my table. And the 3-year-old decided he was going to act up. He wasn't going to cover him out when his father tell him cover him out. He going to bawl when he want bawl. He going to perform, and his father was not having it. So I am looking at a young parent or young parents dealing with a young child at the table who decides he gonna do it his way, and he gonna violate home rules in a public setting at the 85th birthday party dinner for his grandparents, and his father was not having it. I sat back and in some ways was trying to come to his assistance by saying, submit. Do not listen to your father. But his stubbornness led to more harsh treatment. So the point I'm making here is that I left that table with, well, all is not lost, but that is the DNA that the father got from the mother who was sitting at the table. That's the DNA that he got from his grandmother who was sitting at the other table. That's the DNA of the community, the aunts who were there, the extended family members who were there, that behavior is unacceptable.
Exactly.
And if we don't check you at 3 years old, you're going to have some serious problems.
In life.
Right. So it is alive. The village was reacting. The village was cautious. The village, the elders in the room were paying attention to how this was going to unfold with these young parents, with these 2 young children, how he was going to deal with it. The grandmother still extended love. We still hugged and said goodbye and gave love. And that's the village in action, 2024, 21st century St. Thomas. That was representative of maybe 5 or 7 families interconnected in that restaurant. So back to the spirituality aspect is that if you have respect for your elders, then most likely you would be a very responsible adult to taking care of your parents or a parent when the time comes, that you understand the value of having elders in your society, that you would respect them. When you see them in the street, even if they don't remember you, you go up, Miss Imelda, how are you? Child, who you are, who you be, will be probably a respond, then you explain, I's Muddy grandson, I's Muddy great-grandchild, I from Smith Bay, I from Hospital Ground. Memory go back and forth, or your grandmother, your grandparents were good friends, then memory being shared and so forth. So there is this exchange of information, there is this exchange of memory, there's an exchange of this DNA that helps us to be grounded, that helps us to stand firm, that helps us to navigate the landscape, that still helps, even though the Virgin Islands is transformed, that within it, when we walk into a place and good afternoon, the entire room may not respond, but several people will respond to a good afternoon, good evening. How are you? That one day when you're going to your car, you walk in the streets, a child in uniform would say good afternoon as they pass, which may be 2 out of 10 of the children that pass you, but you go, well, all is not lost. There are troopers, our culture is still alive. It may not be the norm for each household, but if there is that still present, then there is hope. There is the idea that this can survive into another generation if we just hold the fort, and that's what gatekeepers to me do. So in response to your initial question about our spirituality, it's all interconnected because our discipline is required to be humble, and likewise, whether it be they would put the fear of God in you, they would put the fear of your existence, that you would say, look, I am not going to embarrass my parents. Before I steal this car, I'm going to think twice because I know my father going to come down here or my grandmother going to just take the skin off of me. I don't want to disrespect my family. When I go out, I represent in my family. You're not a lone shark out here that has no connectivity. You're going to leave the Virgin Islands and you're going to represent the people that you come from well. And we've seen a breakdown of that. Not that it didn't happen in the past, but the fact was that there were more checks and balances because, as you said, everybody was interconnected. And this spirituality of our African belief systems and the way we raised our children. And like I said, I am not here to say that we were perfect because there was very harsh treatments and corporal punishment that was unwarranted.
Yeah.
And that came from a slavery experience once you start to go back. And once you understand that picking up a piece of wherever to beat a child or the harsh treatments and the degradation that embarrassment children had to go through of harsh punishment, well, thank God them days over because but I think about my own fathers and his punishment. I mean, there was no belt or anything, that was a hand. So once he hit you with a hand, you thought you had left Earth and gone.
Yeah, a heavy man hand.
And I promised myself I would never correct my child that way. But I honestly don't have any regrets about my childhood. I just think that at the end of the day, to be better parents, we learn from the past. We should learn from the past and the best practices. But my grandmother, all she had to do was roll her eyes, and I know her state of mind. And I know that was a red flag. And if I continued, I was going to suffer this day. I was going to suffer the actions of my behavior.
That was a warning. That was the last warning shot.
Yeah. So, it kept you in the straight and narrow. You could say, well, in some cases we were repressive in how we raised, I mean, and we getting into the other aspect of the fear of the ocean, the other fears that come with our experience being in a new world under oppression and cruelty, that your mobility, especially your girl children, was guarded. And that's the same for other societies. You didn't just send your grandchildren them out there unescorted and so forth to be abused and taken advantage of. So that's where your uncles and cousins and If you had brothers, they step in for you and so forth, because a woman's chastity and a woman's honor was to be respected. And
Yes.
once violated, there were circumstances.
Okay, so let me go ahead and shift it over to one question that I had. And it's kind of a two-part question. For you personally, I know you have a lot of things going on, and people are always reaching out to you to work on different projects and different events. And I would want to ask you if you have any projects for the future concerning, Virgin Islands cultural preservation, and how do you understand maybe that the political landscape in the Virgin Islands is going to affect these projects? Are you looking forward to it being a supportive entity, or is it going to be something that you find you're going to have to struggle to do the same kind of work that you're doing in the past now and going into the future?
Well, as I explained earlier, this is 5 decades of or more of the work that I've been doing. And I said 5 decades, I like be 50, I'm 68. I really would say that my coming into this reality of responding to the need for a cultural revolution in the Virgin Islands, not that I was the leader. The seed had been planted by people like Dr. Lesmore Emmanuel, who received his first doctorate in African Studies, who came back, taught at a university, who was had written, published Brunansi stories by recording the documenting and printing them, who spoke to why we speak the way we speak, while our educators, especially our English teachers, were telling us we spoke bad English and why we speak like that or speak properly, which also came from in the hope that our language tradition had no value, and why we say they instead of there, why we say they are for in St. Croix, where we say why the context to our language tradition from Dutch and Irish and Scottish, German and Danish influences and others, and the vocabulary, like your mother might say that's my comado, and you go like comado. Yeah, I am her daughter's godmother, so that's my comado or compado, not knowing that the words come from Spanish words that have been readapted into an English Creole. For me, like I the godparent of my friend child. So, and other jealousy, close the jealousy, which is French, and so forth. And you think these words were constructs that we created, but they were borrowed from other cultural language tradition to make a vocabulary and a context to language, and that is specifically an English Creole that came from a Dutch-speaking population, a Dutch Creole-speaking population in St. Thomas and St. John, and an Irish, Welsh, Scottish language tradition out of England or the English Isles. So the point I'm making here is that if you don't have the historic context to your evolution, anyone could come and tell you anything, and you could believe it. You could live that lie, live that untruth, live that unreality of your existence. It's like someone coming and say, well, you know your great-grandfather was the best joiner in St. Thomas. You go, great-grandfather was the best joiner. I didn't know that. Or your grandmother was the best cook out in East End now. You go, yeah, she was that. Yeah, but what happened to our recipes? How come what happened? Yeah, but this is not just unique to us. As people move and migrate, their their collective memory could be lost, if not passed down. So as gatekeepers today, we have this responsibility of restoring this memory.
And so what are some of the ways you will continue to do that in the projects you have coming up? And do you get support from the government and these other entities who should be helping you do this work?
All right, so in that regards, we created a Virgin Islands Cultural Heritage Institute after we went to this Folk Life Festival in 1990 after Hurricane Marilyn in 1989. That the Virgin Islands didn't have a culture, and we proved that wrong by assembling Virgin Islands gatekeepers, cooks, occupational craft, individuals, trades, carpentry, furniture making, brew making, herbalists, dance, musicians, quail bay, quadrille, and folk dancing, you name it, language, tradition, storytelling, spirituality, Jumbi stories. We presented our stories from that cultural perspective, creating a big yard, and we decided we were going to create this Cultural Heritage Institute, which we did through the support of Governor Alexander Farrelly. The Virgin Islands Institute was born, but today it's dysfunctional because our elected officials and administrators haven't really seen the value. These are Virgin Islanders who don't see the value of and the importance of putting a institution like that in place that would support the festival arts, that would support a Virgin Islands identity. And when I say this Virgin Islands identity, I've come to the conclusion people get frightened when they hear Virgin Islands. They may think it be exclusive, and for some it may be, but for me, Virgin Islands mean what we are today, what we were in the past, and what we are going to be in the future. So Goldwater wasn't my experience as a child growing up, but it's a part of my culture, Virgin Islands culture today. You could go to a food truck and get Goldwater. Saltfish, spinach, and butter bread wasn't my Sunday breakfast, but saltfish, pick up saltfish might have been maybe an occasion, not every day, not every Sunday. But the point I'm saying here is that others have influenced pastelis in St. Croix is part of Crucian cuisine as much as roast pork, which was roast pork was here, but in St. Croix, especially the Spanish Puerto Rican way of roasting pork is very much a Crucian tradition today. So if you hear pork, usually it's gonna be some Crucian with some Puerto Rican ancestry who doing that pork for the event. Shown. Even the quail bisa, I want a piece of pork from a Christmas by Stanley and the 10 Sleepless Nights speaks to this cross-cultural fertilization and what outside of isolation for several hundred years in some cultures in the past, and still today there's some societies so close that the outside world has, but not had a great impact, wherever that may be. The point I'm saying here is that we borrow, we exchange ideas, and same way with foodways and language traditions and why we store fungi and why we make dukana and why we got dumpling and pea soup and why pig feet is a cuisine from the discards of pigtail and pig knuckle and pig feet from the best part of the pork because we either couldn't afford it or the massa kept the best part and discarded the unwarranted or the less desirable parts of that meat bowl, oxtail, versus the best of the beef. Or you could take oxtail and make oxtail, peas and rice, plantain, and so forth, and make that delicacy today. Saltfish, it's similar to why, there's gumbo in the United States and why there's chitlins in the South, and why there's possum, and these were part of the everyday diet. That's also for Appalachian places, white culture, likewise, who have a similar story of coming up from poverty and had to eat potato. The Irish and the like that. I mean, potato was their staple, where corn or rice might have been our staple in West Africa, or sorghum, or whatever that may be. The point I'm making here is that I have found that as Virgin Islanders, our ability to advance our cultural heritage is very much stymied by our ignorance of our own self and our history. And thus we become our own enemy. And I could say that today because there is a piece of legislation before the Senate from a Virgin Island senator who wants to change the historic preservation laws to make it easier to either demolish or renovate or change historic buildings in a historic district. The point I'm raising here is it comes with a double sword, because basically what you want to do is erode the provisions that protect that cultural resource under the guise that the Historic Preservation Commission rules and regulations are so restrictive that that's why we have abandoned buildings in the neighborhoods, while the governor proposes a piece of legislation that addresses blight and abandonment by creating this a conservator who comes with particular requirements, who may approach the property owners and convince them, or by law allows that conservator to act on behalf of the property owner, with the idea that after the family get their act together, they could recapture or the investment made in their property can be exchanged back to the families for ownership and control. And
that sounds to me like a really good way for people who are not from this island, who are moneyed, to be able to swoop in and gain access to to buildings, real estate. And you see this kind of thing happening not just here, but also in Puerto Rico. They're having a big issue with this, and we know places like Hawaii as well, where people are not being able to maybe upkeep a place, or they keep fall behind the taxes, and it's giving this room for external influences, external real estate interests to come in, take over, and displace. And that is a concern, I think, not just, like I said, in Virgin Islands and other places in the Caribbean too. So it seems like you're kind of addressing that. And it's good that you're bringing this up here, because it's good to have this documented and stated. And so basically you feel that the move of the political wing, or the political entities of Virgin Islands, is moving towards a more of a non-preservationist stance.
yes, because for those of us in the trenches who promote cultural heritage, we feel like we're under attack. Our cultural heritage is under attack in so many facets, under policies that would erode or make it disappear before we really do before we really all agree, after exhausting the debate of why it's important that the town of Frederiksted, built by Black artisans in the Victorian era after the fire burn, represents in the Western Hemisphere, a African-built town of resistance, freedom, inclusion, equality, economic development. I could go on and on and on. The point I'm making here is, if you have a footprint of that exists, but you seen it, well, it's a Danish town, because I named Frederiksted, named after a Danish king. Yeah, we burned it down and it was rebuilt, but it's Danish architecture. When you got tropical and West African elements incorporated into tropical architecture that evolved, that we would make sure that hip roofs become the norm because it sustains against hurricane. We don't do overhangs, we have cross ventilation, so you don't need air condition. We did gingerbread trim, and you could link some of those, your trim, yes, to the Victorian era, but you could also look at the African aesthetics of creativity being interpreted, the furniture making, the ton, the use of motifs from nature carved into wood, whether it be the palm, whether it be the flora, the fauna, the snake, all of that. That's not being taught in our schools. That is not part of the vocabulary of our expressions of who we are as a people. So yes, you could say, well, we're making furniture no more. But that's not necessarily true. But it's an industry where we're not self-sufficient, meaning that you don't go to a store and find local made furniture. But that's true of many parts of the world. But the fact is that we don't have proficient carpenters. We don't have proficient cabinet makers. But then you could say, well, the people who making kitchen cabinets and making cabinets for stores and so forth, they are continuing this tradition, yes. But how proficient how are we? Are we able to restore and to maintain this architectural heritage that speaks so much to our African ancestors and their craftsmanship and their contribution and that memory? So we're tearing it down and we're replacing them with square box concrete buildings. And if that's the collective will of the people, that historic landscape no longer should be remembered, then so be it. But I could tell you that once that's gone, that collective memory of place, that this is the birthplace of Governor Farrelly, this cottage in Christiansted was where Melvin H. Evans was born. You may not be able to save everything, but this is where Anna Haggard burial ground. This is where Queen Mary buried in that open field. That you know that you need to put a marker there. You can't identify where exactly she buried, but you know she buried on this estate. This is the prison where the 3 queens or the 4 queens, bars and jailhouse, with the money there in the folk song, under bush in next to the fire station in Richmond, where the word Bazan come from. Bazan jailhouse, did the money there, is the French word for Christiansted. If you're not teaching this vocabulary of our historical narrative to how we came to be, then it's easy to erase that DNA and say that it's not worthy of collective memory. And even if we make a decision to tear it down, that before you tear it down, you document it. You document everybody who remember coming to that fort, coming to that jailhouse, that you could come back to a digital something, a book or a document. This is how we live. This is how this place, this jailhouse, these are the those who were incarcerated. This is where we live. This is the birthplace of who X, Y, and Z. If you're not doing that consistent with what you want to now take out, then that memory is going to be lost to forever.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't believe they're making those connecting dots. They see blight, and yes, we have a problem, but they're not coming up with the solution of how we're going to take building by building, street by street. They're saying economically, it's not an investment that we can afford. Let me put it this way. Places like Brazil, Puerto Rico, Old San Juan had similar discussion. Brazil, Bahia, where we started, became World Heritage. Curacao, World Heritage, where the buildings and the streetscapes were preserved. What you do behind the walls is another thing. But the fact is that they become World Heritage sites that speaks to it. Now, Yugong Bandanga Town in 1878, and it was rebuilt by African artisans, and exceptions. You know, there are exceptions of, okay, some European craftsmen also were engaged, but let's face it, who was the workforce in these islands? You know, so yeah, you had Danish craftsmen who were in the territory, you had goldsmiths, blacksmiths, etc. But much of that was done by the African population. We built the windmills. You want to tear down every windmill in St. Croix because it represents slavery, it represents the era of slavery, then how do you tell the story that now in the United States is they're rewriting a false narrative of, you know, slavery was good for the enslaved.
Yeah, yeah.
Made him a good blacksmith. He became free because he picked cotton, and he became a what you call one of them farmers?
Sharecropper.
A sharecropper, and he buy freedom from that. So yeah, slavery was good for him. I mean, it's, you know, that is, we have in our landscape the evidence of a past that says you're not going to erase this history. This history, you can see it, you can touch it, you could visit it, you could go through the bush, you could see it. This is where our ancestors worked, dwell, blood, tears, die. When you go visit the 1733 walk in November, after Friday, after Thanksgiving, you go up to the fort, you go to the plantations, you walk through the bush, and you see these places where Africans demanded their freedom, held them for 6 months under European domination, and held that island as an independent African nation for 6 months. And you don't even see the value of taking the Ghanaian flag and adopting that as the 8th flag of the Virgin Islands. That tells you where we are mentally. It tells you that we don't even value our own contribution, that we struck a chord for freedom. But then you want to tell me St. Croix is under 7th flag, or the Virgin Islands have 7 flags because the Dutch killed the British governor and took over for a week, and then the French came and killed the British governor and took over for another 3 weeks or 1 year. And so you have these 7 flags up at the airport, and you don't recall your 6 months where you independently held and declared your independence, put up a flag on a fort, fought for your freedom, committed suicide to return spiritually to your native home, Africa, to your ancestors, that blood, sweat, and tears equally is important and should be in the narrative?
Of course, man. That's it. The idea, you're talking about this whole white supremacy and the colonized mind that Frantz Fanon would be speaking of. You can't even see the truth of what your people did because of for some kind of shame or some kind of inability to see the strength and the prowess and the amazing feats that we just in surviving, retaining our culture and then fomenting it, but not nonetheless holding an island for 6 months. You're talking about the Aquamu Rebellion in St. John.
Yes.
So
and that before you came to the Americas, before you came to the so-called New World, you had taken over the fort in Osu from the Danes, who you gave permission to build the fort, took the keys, and they had to buy it back from you. So that even in your narrative across the Atlantic, that there is a connecting story to that 1733 of the same people who fought years before and took the fort away from the Danes, that when they came to St. John, they said, well, we did it before, we could do it again. So you're not making the connecting dots that the Red Fort, Fort Christian, was painted white and is linked to Cape Coast Castle, to Elmina Castle, to Osu Castle, to Fredericksburg Castle, to Quetta Castle, where your ancestors came from the cells to the hulls of the boats to be thrown out on the docks, and to the squares and the action blocks, that fort narrative, that where you go to party and to have fete, was your beginnings in this place, that you completely stripped, that sacred space is where your ancestors paid the ultimate price, sold to the highest bidder, and is connected to World Heritage Sites on the West Coast. You have no idea. And Virgin Islands Museum, Civic and Cultural Center with a School for Arts and Culture, the old Jarvis School. We just started to work on renovating Building B of a site that's comprised of three sites, and that we would encourage our government to dedicate the land necessary to build a modern museum, civic and cultural center for the expressions of our people, and that where we can pass on memory. So that's what we're doing right now. So thank you very much for your advocacy. Thank you very much for your willingness to work with us in this regard. And I say us because it's not me alone. There are other gatekeepers who have been part of this process. There are others who are no longer with us. That 19th century building, it was used as a military hospital. In the Danish period, it was converted into a communal school. During the Danish period, in the American period after 1917, the name was changed to the Abraham Lincoln School, elementary school. It remained that until the local legislature renamed it for J. Antonio Jarvis, who was a teacher at that particular facility. And then it shuttered almost 15 years ago or more. The Department of Education discontinued it as an active school, and the building was left shuttered. And then we began the advocacy to convert this building into public use for educational purposes. And then prior to the centennial of the sale of the Danish West Indies to the United States of America, 100th anniversary, it was decided that we probably should use this site as a museum. And one thing led to the next, and we've determined through those discussions, it became a centennial project. The sister project is a school for architecture on Hospital Street. This is also on Hospital Street. It was also a barracks and school. The projects are very similar on similar name streets, similar functions, almost a similar history of community use, and St. Croix, their structures likewise were used for education. So one is a school for arts and culture, which is our project, and the construction of a museum, civic and cultural center, and an adjacent site not too far down the block, which was supposed to be the old Apollo Theater, but we lost that to private concerns, which was the first cultural center, so to speak, on St. Thomas, was the old Apollo Theater site at the bottom of Government Hill. So right now we're asking the government to consider, when the Department of Education moved out from that complex, which was an old Catholic convent, that site be used for the construction of a new museum, civic and cultural center. Another site, after we lost that site, was the Zone A command building, but I do believe education is the better site of the two. So that's our project that we're working on. We created a nonprofit. It's a joint effort between government and the NGO, non-government organization, nonprofit, to create working spaces for the advancement and preservation of our culture, that these structures will be used, put into public use, that cultural organizations and groups would have a home instead of being in parking lots. And not that being in the park is bad, but we've justified that dancing on concrete and brick and in outdoor spaces that are not adequate for such activities is okay, because that's all we have.
Mm-hmm.
We have not invested into a place where dance could be best supported by providing a space that has a wooden floor. So if you go to St. Croix for quadrille, you won't go to St. Gerald's Hall to dance in the Catholic Church Hall, which was used for the school and for the church and the community, where quadrille is danced on a wooden floor,
Mm-hmm.
which is good. So if we're going to advance the arts and also advance 21st century practices, I would be the right word, we have to provide the facilities. We can't talk about a museum that is open to the elements, where salt air and water have an impact on artifacts and historical materials that's placed there, but we call it a museum, which is Fort Christian, which does not have any air control, any air quality control. The cells are open to the salt air. It should be interpreted as a fort, as it was, with some context to its use, not try to make it this. The time has passed, we just could do better. So we want quality control spaces. We want places where Virgin Islanders could come and feel proud to express themselves, to tell their stories, where we could invite other artists, other culturalists, the cultural communities from the region and outside of our region to come and engage us, to provide a space where a moderate audience could be adequately and comfortably in a space where acoustics and our spoken word and our performances can be done. And this is not in place of Ryko Center. We see this as the incubator to get to the stage of Ryko Center.
Mhm.
So this is not necessarily a school of performing arts, but a place where a folkloric group, a Deanne Parson group, 21st, the mentoring through the arts, could use a space, get a floor and use a space to exist. And that the new construction of a museum and civic center provides the means to for us to be competitive and also to advance our arts and culture as it should.
That sounds like a really great project. So any ideas of the determined finishing date? Would you all have a timeline you're working with?
Well, right now, 2024 January, we started to work on building B for a community outreach center and office. That's next to the 3-story brick building that was used for a hospital and school. And we're about to complete that by February, late February. We should be finished with that building and then move into it and open its doors. We were in the building prior to 2017, and the hurricanes hit and damaged the building, so it's been closed ever since. For the new museum, Civic and Cultural Center, once securing a site, we've had attempts for fundraising for $10 million. Of course, that was 8 years ago. Close to 10 that we came up with that number for the entire project, but we believe that the museum now will be easily a $20 million investment from ground up to put in all of what is required. Easily 20,000 would be the best working number.
20 million.
10,000 with $10 million, I'd say 10,000. I hope I didn't say 10,000 before. It's
Oh,
10
you said million, yeah.
Okay, 10 million. We believe today, 2024, that quote would most likely be 20 million with inflation and everything else since COVID. So we're doing it in phases. We got a $500,000 grant from the federal government. We had seed money from the VA government and Danish concerns. And we've been working with that to get us thus far. So we're pretty happy. We were granted a lease, a 1-year lease to get things moving. And then we're going to the Senate for a long-term lease for the project to get that moving. So we feel pretty good. There's movement. The site is a pivotal site into the corridor of hospital ground, as you know. This community has suffered greatly over the last 40 years with increased crime and especially gun violence and deterioration of the community. And we believe a project like this brings restoration of the soul and new purpose and new meaning to a neighborhood that means everything to especially St. Thomas residents, because it's the home of our national stadium.
Yes.
What is our healthcare facilities, Newt Hansen Municipal Hospital. So you have this national stadium sitting in distress with around it, and likewise our government gives it basically has walked away from it for the most part. No longer a cultural carnival takes place there like that since we created the festival division, which was a piece of legislation we created a festival division within tourism. It was
I know that we've been speaking quite a bit, so I'm gonna let you make some closing comments. Anything else you want to add, that you didn't get to share that you would like to share with people in this discussion, this conversation we're having?
well, I think we opened some areas that we didn't necessarily think we were going to have a discussion. So I'm going to leave it as it is. I'm available for part 2 of this discussion in some of the areas we did not discuss this afternoon. I thank you for the opportunity. I do believe that we are doing the work of our ancestors. I do consider this ancestral work in supporting and advancing the culture, making sure that we have the spaces that are required to pass on this legacy, to pass on this collective memory, to pass on these traditions, to pass on these stories to our next generation, and for all who are interested as an anchor that allows us our sanity, that allows us our creativity, that allows us a voice. So again, thank you very much. And again, I thank you for your advocacy and what you're doing with this particular project, and also the spoken voice of those who you will engage in telling this narrative of why it's important that we stay steadfast. And just like you have that VA flag up there, that we stay committed to the purpose. So as gatekeepers, I'm really just doing the work that I believe I've been sent here to do. There's no question in my mind of the importance of the work that I do. I no longer question that. I have seen advances made from our community and from generations of Virgin Islanders, that there's a better appreciation for the importance of culture. But you can't, that requires us to be vigilant. That requires for us to do what is necessary to pass on. So these traditions, this knowledge, this information, so that you make conscious choices, that you understand before you tear down and throw away the baby with the bathwater. You know clearly what you're doing. And if you so choose to throw away the baby with the bathwater, I don't believe that you would. I think you would see the value in preserving the baby. Throw away the water, yes, but not the baby.
Yes.
So, and in that regards, we say Sankofa, go back and fetch it. And I look forward to future engagements with you on this podcast. And
Yes.
the like.
Yes, Baba. It was a great pleasure to speak with you and see you. I look forward to my next visit home, so we can engage in person and play some drums and eat some food.
They're sitting right there in the mats there in the background. So
yeah, check.
Waiting.
I check. So be well, and regards to your family, your beautiful family, and may you be blessed. May your celestial mother protect you and watch over you, and may you have the blessings of God and all the ancestors in all your endeavors, my brother.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and the same to you, ditto, and continued success in your new location, and stay warm, and come back to us soon.
I will. All right, brother.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye. So that was a conversation with brother Myron Jackson in St. Thomas. Definitely a cultural preservationist, a leader in the community, an upstanding man who's doing the work it takes for us to preserve the culture, the history, and fight and advocate for continued study, continued remembrance, and a continued vigilance to maintain our culture as it evolves. But let's not, as he said, throw the baby out with the bathwater. Thank you so much for listening. Ashe.